In May, the Chinese authorities took the fairly unusual decision of publicly announcing that they were taking over the running of a failing bank. This was Baoshang Bank, a relatively small bank, not systemically important, located in Inner Mongolia. And the important fact with this is not that they took over the failing bank. I mean, the Chinese government have been bailing out banks for a number of years. But the interesting thing is, usually we don't hear about these bailouts. They're not publicly announced. This was the first time the government had publicly said that they were prepared to step in and sort this bank out. And not only that, but letting people know what was going on. Now, the Chinese government isn't always that transparent, but in this case it really was. And within the space of 1 month, they had issued 3 question and answer sheets detailing exactly what they could do, what they were going to do, insofar as they would divulge that information. So they made it clear that they wanted to be as transparent and open as possible. And they explained very clearly who would be suffering losses in this case. And for the first time in 20 years, they said that they were prepared to let creditors suffer losses. Admittedly, this wasn't very significant. One of their Q&As suggested that they would protect people to 99.98%, meaning that 0.02% of the money held in Baoshang Bank could be at risk. Now, the significance of all this transparency is this is very clearly a very early stage for the government to start interjecting moral hazard into the system, to actually work out when a bank hits problems, what is going to happen. Now, in general, there's been this assumption that the government doesn't allow defaults. It will step in and protect things, both in the corporate world and the banking world, and obviously many of these really big institutions like the big 4 Chinese banks are owned by the government and run by the government. So the government doesn't want things to fail. But in 2014 it started allowing defaults. In the corporate world, corporate bonds would start defaulting. So it has become more willing to let things default. So this is important. Under China's commitments as part of the G20 group of countries, China was actually supposed to set out very clearly plans for what happens when a bank collapses, when a systemically important bank collapses. Now, this could be one of the big 4, which are globally systemically important, because if they collapsed, there would be serious consequences throughout the world. But this also should extend to the DSIBs, the domestically systemically important banks. If they collapse, how are they resolved? How are they unwound? There's also an argument, which is particularly emerging in Europe and America, that the resolution framework, a country's resolution framework, should not just apply to the systemically important banks, but it should even apply to the smaller banks. So the government should take care to work out what is happening there. Now, up until this point, China really hasn't done anything in terms of outlining its resolution framework, apart from a deposit insurance scheme that it set up. But the deposit insurance scheme has far too little money in it, to offer the protection for all depositors should a bank collapse, which raises the question of exactly what is the point of the deposit insurance scheme. But that aside, what the Chinese government now seems to be doing is testing the waters with Baoshang Bank's collapse, and doing it in a controlled way. So this was not a systemically important bank. It was important in the Inner Mongolia region, but beyond that, it was easy to contain. Not only that, but this is something that the government has been working on for a year. So it went through this smooth transition of how to sort of slowly unwind this bank. And as it was doing so, let everyone know about it. And there hasn't been huge economic consequences on that. People were worried that this could spill over into other banks. And there has been a sign that other banks have been feeling a little bit of pressure as depositors have thought about pulling out their money because of this. There has been a liquidity squeeze on some of the banks, but not significant. So the Chinese authorities have been sort of testing this water, and this is a good thing because it is going to pave the way for a resolution framework. Of course, there are many other things to work out. The government, for example, was very clear about how depositors are going to be protected. The criteria for protected depositors, all retail depositors will be protected, and the majority of business and institutional depositors will below a certain threshold. So it's been very clear on that. But what happens about bondholders? Are bondholders going to be protected? Are the people that have bought the debt of the bank going to be protected? And that's crucial. But the government has not said anything about that, presumably because it's quite difficult to work out exactly what that means. And I think eventually that will come. So the question of what to do with bondholders is very important, because as part of the G20 commitments, it is supposed to design a framework for the bondholders to support the bank before the government steps in. Now, in China's case, this is a little bit odd because many of the big banks are actually owned by the government, which is unlike the situation in most other countries where there are globally important banks. So it does need to sort of address that issue. And there were some other issues that came out of the Baoshang Bank default. And there is also a crucial question of the Baoshang Bank default seems to have gone relatively smoothly. The government has taken control. There's been no major disruption to the market other than a few minor liquidity events. But this was also because the government had a year to understand what was happening. A bigger question would arise if there was suddenly a major liquidity event and a mid-sized bank went under very quickly and the government couldn't control that. So that is what the government is going to have to work out. The government is going to have to work out how to deal with that. And it is heading in the right way and the right direction. I'm sure step by step it will address that.